Life moves at a silver velocity, a blur of light and sound that requires a steady hand to navigate and a brave heart to survive. We capture the high-speed moments that define our era in stunning high definition. Hit subscribe now and keep up with the pace of the future.
Granddaughter came to stay with us every other weekend. That was the arrangement ever since my son's divorce. Every other weekend, she'd show up Friday evening with her little rolling suitcase and that gap-toothed smile, and my wife and I would have the best 2 days of our week. But the last 3 visits, she hadn't smiled much. I noticed it the way you notice weather changing before the rain actually hits. Emma was 6, almost 7, and she'd always been the kind of kid who narrated everything. "Grandpa, look at this. Grandpa, watch me. Grandpa, did you know that dolphins sleep with one eye open?" She'd ask questions faster than I could answer them, bounce between topics like a pinball, drag me outside to look at bugs she'd found in the garden even in November. Then sometime around October, she stopped doing all of that. She'd sit at the kitchen table and color, which was fine, except she'd been coloring the same picture over and over, a house with a very dark attic window. My wife thought she was just going through a phase. "Kids get quiet sometimes," she said. Growing pains. I wanted to believe that. Lord knows I wanted to believe that. I'm 61 years old. I spent 32 years as a high school history teacher in Dayton, Ohio before I retired. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a detective, I'm not anyone special, but I've spent a career watching kids. You learn to read what they're not saying when you've stood in front of teenagers long enough. What Emma wasn't saying was scaring me. It was a Sunday in November, the kind of gray Ohio afternoon where the sky looks like wet cement and the leaves have all given up. My wife had gone to the grocery store. Emma and I were in the den, her coloring, me pretending to read. At some point, she put her crayon down and looked at me with those brown eyes that she got from her mother. "Grandpa," she said, "does a room have to be a real room?" I set my book down. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She picked her crayon back up. "Like, can a room be real even if it's not a real room? Like if someone says it's not a room?" I made myself stay calm. "I think if it feels like a room to you, it's real. Why are you asking?" She didn't answer right away. She colored the attic window darker. Then she said, very quietly, "Because Mommy says it's just a storage space, but I have to go in there when I'm bad." The crayon in her hand scratched across the paper, hard, leaving a dark mark that went off the page. "I have been alive for 6 decades. I have buried both my parents and a brother. I have sat with students who lost friends in car accidents and talked them through the worst days of their young lives. And I'm telling you that nothing prepared me for what I felt sitting in that den on a gray Sunday afternoon, hearing my granddaughter say those words. I have to go in there when I'm bad. I kept my voice even. I had to. Who takes you there, Emma?" She pressed her lips together. "I'm not supposed to say. You can tell me anything, you know that." Her lower lip trembled. "Rob says if I tell you, you'll be really disappointed in me. He says Grandpa doesn't like bad little girls." Rob, my son's ex-wife, had remarried 8 months prior. Rob Decker was his name. He was 44, worked in sales, drove a black truck, coached a recreational soccer team. He had a good handshake and a ready laugh, and had never once given me a reason to look at him sideways. I thought about every conversation I'd had with Rob, every family dinner, every soccer game sideline, every time he clapped my son on the back and called him buddy even though they'd never been close. He'd always seemed fine. That word. Fine. The most meaningless word in the English language. "Emma," I said carefully, "I could never be disappointed in you. Never. Do you understand me? Not ever." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, small. "What happens in the storage space?" I asked. She shook her head fast, the way kids do when they've been trained not to answer something. Not the head shake of a child who doesn't know. The head shake of a child who knows exactly and has been told very clearly what happens if she tells. "It's okay," I said. "You don't have to tell me right now. I just want you to know. Nothing that happens there is your fault. Do you hear me? Nothing is your fault." She started to cry, quietly, with her chin down, like she was trying to hide that she was doing it, like she learned that crying out loud made things worse. That image will be with me until the day I die. My daughter-in-law, my son's ex-wife Clara, came to pick Emma up at 4. I watched Emma walk to the car. She didn't look back at the house. She got in and sat very still while Clara buckled her in, and the car pulled away. and I stood on the front porch in the cold and felt completely helpless. That night I didn't sleep. My wife and I talked until 2 in the morning. She had questions I didn't have answers to. We went in circles the way you do when you can't accept the direction the conversation keeps pointing. What I kept coming back to was this. Emma said she had to go into a locked storage space when she was bad. She'd been getting quieter for months. She'd flinched when Clara opened a door too fast at dinner back in September. I'd noticed it and filed it away. Told myself I was being paranoid. Told myself there was an explanation. She'd stopped asking to use the attic at our house to play, even though she used to love it. She'd been coloring that house with that dark window over and over. I found myself Googling things at 2 in the morning that I'd never imagined I'd have reason to Google. The words I read made my stomach drop. Confinement as punishment. Isolation. A child made to believe she is inherently bad. Teaching a child that her pain is a secret. I'd been a mandatory reporter for 30 years. Every teacher in Ohio is. I knew the hotline number. But something stopped me. Not disbelief. I was past that. It was fear of what happened if I was wrong. Fear of what happened to Emma if I was right. And the first call didn't stick. I'd heard stories. I knew the system wasn't perfect. I needed to be sure I had something real before I made that call. Because if I made it wrong, if Clara and Rob were tipped off before there was real investigation, Emma would be alone in that house with them, and they'd know someone was watching. I decided to go slowly, and I decided not to tell my son yet because I knew he'd want to drive straight to that house and confront Rob, and that could ruin everything. The next Saturday, Clara dropped Emma off for a playdate with a neighborhood friend. I was the one who picked her up afterward, and I took the long way home. We stopped at a diner and got milkshakes. Chocolate for her, strawberry for me, same as always. We sat in that diner booth for 2 hours. She told me in pieces, the way traumatized children do. Not a linear story, not all at once but scattered, circling back, sometimes going quiet mid-sentence and staring at the table. I didn't push. I asked the gentlest questions I could, and when she went quiet I said that's okay, and changed the subject and let her come back when she was ready, because she always came back. What she told me was this. Rob had converted the storage space at the top of their house into what he called a thinking room. There was a padlock on the outside. When Emma did something he decided was wrong, spilled something, talked back, cried during a meal, he took her up there and locked her in. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer. He told her it was her own fault. He told her good girls didn't need to go in the thinking room. He told her that if she told anyone, they'd know she was a bad girl, and bad girls got taken away from their families. She was 6 years old. She'd been in that room at least a dozen times in the 8 months since the remarriage. I paid for the milkshakes. I drove home carefully, both hands on the wheel, the same way I'd driven home from the hospital the night my father died. The specific kind of control that happens when something in you wants to fall apart and you can't let it. Not yet. I got Emma inside and my wife took over, and I went into the garage and sat in my car in the dark for about 20 minutes. Then I called the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services Child Abuse Hotline. The intake worker asked me questions in a measured, professional voice. I answered them all. At the end, she told me that a caseworker would contact me within 24 hours. She told me the report would be kept confidential. She asked me if the child was in immediate danger. I said I didn't believe so right at this moment. She said, "Thank you for calling." The call lasted 11 minutes. I hung up and sat there thinking about whether 11 minutes was enough to save my granddaughter. The caseworker came to our house the next morning. Her name was Beverly Sims, a woman in her 50s with a calm manner and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She asked to speak with Emma alone first, which I understood, and which was one of the harder things I've done, sitting in my kitchen with my wife, while a stranger talked to my grandchild in the den. After 45 minutes, Beverly came back to the kitchen. She sat across from us and said she'd heard enough to open a formal investigation and request an emergency home assessment at Clara and Rob's residence. She told me Emma had spoken clearly and consistently. She said Emma had used language that caseworkers are trained to recognize. Language that carries the specific texture of genuine disclosure rather than coached statements. She said this quietly, in a way that told me she'd done this before and it didn't make it easier. She also told me that I'd done the right thing by calling, but that I shouldn't expect things to move quickly. These investigations took time. Clara hadn't been formally implicated. Emma's account centered on Rob. What happened next depended on what the home assessment found and what Emma said in a formal forensic interview. My son found out that night. I drove to his apartment and told him face to face because that was the only way to do it. He sat on his couch and didn't move for a long time. He's 34 years old and he's been through a difficult divorce, and he's not someone who cries easily, and he cried. Then he stood up and said he was going over there. I held him by the arm in the hallway of his apartment for 5 minutes, talking him down, telling him that if he went over there tonight, he could hand Rob's attorney everything he needed to make us look like the problem. He knew I was right. He sat back down on the couch. We didn't sleep that night either. The forensic interview was conducted 5 days later at a child advocacy center in Dayton, a place specifically designed for these interviews with trained specialists and one-way observation windows. I wasn't in the room. I sat in a waiting area with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and my son sat beside me, and neither of us spoke much. The interviewer was a woman named Dr. Helen Marsh, patient, soft-spoken, with a manner that made you feel like everything was under control, even when nothing was. After 90 minutes, she came out and spoke briefly with Beverly Sims, and what she told the caseworker was enough. Based on Emma's disclosure in the home assessment, which had found the storage room exactly as Emma had described, complete with the exterior padlock, the department requested an emergency protective order. Rob Decker was removed from the home pending investigation. Clara, who claimed she'd had no knowledge of the confinement despite the padlock being on the outside of the door, was referred for a separate assessment. I don't entirely believe Clara didn't know. I'm not sure I'll ever believe it. But the investigation wasn't mine to conduct. Emma came to stay with us that Friday, not for a weekend, indefinitely, while the legal process sorted itself out. She showed up with her little rolling suitcase and she didn't smile. Not at first. She walked through our front door and went straight to the den and sat on the couch and looked at the window for a while. My wife brought her hot chocolate and sat beside her without saying anything, and after a few minutes, Emma leaned into her. That first week was hard. Emma woke up 2 nights in a row asking where she was. She didn't want to go upstairs in our house, which made sense in a way that broke my heart. She was very quiet in ways I'd gotten used to, and very loud in ways that surprised me. Sudden outbursts over small things, a sippy cup in the wrong place, the TV on a channel she didn't choose, the kind of behavioral dysregulation I'd read about online at 2 in the morning. I'm not a therapist. I'm a retired history teacher. But I knew enough to know I needed to get her to one. Dr. Anita Flores came recommended by the Child Advocacy Center. She was in her early 40s, had an office with a sand tray and a shelf full of puppets, and she spoke to Emma in a way that made Emma talk without seeming to realize she was talking. They met twice a week. Dr. Tynes Quake. Flores also met with me once a week, coaching me through what she called trauma-informed caregiving, what to do when Emma had a meltdown, how to respond to nightmares, how to create safety without creating a cage. You can't fix this, Dr. Flores told me directly. In our 3rd session, what you can do is make it safe enough for her brain to start healing itself. Your job right now isn't to fix the damage. Your job is to be steady, to be predictable, to show her that this is different. I wrote that down and put it on my refrigerator. Be steady, be predictable, show her this is different. The investigation into Rob Decker moved slowly, as Beverly had warned. He'd retained an attorney immediately and was cooperating with investigators just enough to not appear uncooperative. His position was that the storage room was not a punishment, that Emma had sometimes chosen to go up there to calm down, that the padlock was a safety measure because the room had a window that didn't have a proper latch, and he'd been worried about a fall. The audacity of it made me want to put my fist through something. But Dr. Flores had warned me about this too. Abusers rarely confess, she'd said. They reframe, they minimize, they make the victim the problem. Be prepared for that. The formal charges came 4 months after my first call to the hotline. Rob Decker was charged with unlawful restraint of a minor and child endangerment under Ohio law. His attorney filed a motion to suppress Emma's forensic interview on procedural grounds. The motion was denied. My son's attorney simultaneously filed for an emergency modification of the custody arrangement, and given the active criminal investigation, the family court judge granted it. Emma's primary residence was changed to my son's apartment, effective immediately. Clara retained visitation rights pending further evaluation, supervised. I'm not going to pretend the next year was straightforward. It was the hardest year of my life, and I've had some hard years. There were weeks Emma was doing beautifully, coming home from school chatty, dragging me outside to look at the first crocuses in March, bringing home a drawing she'd done in art class that she wanted to put on the refrigerator. And there were weeks she regressed, stopped sleeping, clung to whoever was in the room, became afraid of doors closing. Dr. Flores said this was normal. Healing isn't linear, she said. It goes in waves. The wave comes back lower each time, but it comes back. She was right. The waves got smaller. The trial was held in the spring. I won't go through every day of it. I'll just say that watching a 6 now, almost 8-year-old sit in a courtroom and answer questions about something that should never have happened to her was the most difficult thing I have sat through in my life. Emma was composed in a way that was both impressive and terrible, because you understood what had taught her to compose herself like that. Rob Decker's attorney tried hard. He suggested Emma had confused events. He suggested my son had coached her. He questioned whether the padlock was really locked when she was inside, or whether Emma had simply misremembered. He was doing his job, and his job required him to make an abused 7-year-old seem unreliable in front of a jury of 12 people. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on both counts. The judge sentenced Rob Decker to 6 years in prison, with mandatory registration as a child abuser upon release, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting contact with Emma or any minor under 16. The judge said from the bench that the use of confinement as punishment, systematic, deliberate, designed to terrorize, represented a particularly cruel form of psychological abuse, one that left marks that didn't always show up on x-rays but lasted far longer than bruises. Clara pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor failure to protect charge and received 3 years of supervised probation and mandatory parenting classes. She lost primary custody permanently. Whether she truly didn't know is something I'd made my peace with not knowing. 3 weeks after sentencing, my son called me from his apartment. "Dad," he said, "you need to come over." I drove over, not knowing what to find. I walked in, and Emma was sitting at his kitchen table with construction paper and markers. She'd made something. She handed it to me without saying anything. It was a card. On the front, she'd drawn 2 figures, a tall one and a small one, standing outside a house. There was a sun in the corner, slightly lopsided, the way suns are when 7-year-olds draw them. Inside, she'd written, in her careful printed letters, "Thank you for listening, Grandpa. I love you." From Emma. Below that, she'd added with a different marker, "P.S. The room doesn't scare me anymore." I held that card together with myself for about 30 seconds. Then I excused myself to the bathroom. There is a particular kind of crying that's not about sadness. I don't know what to call it. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or the release of something that's been held so tight for so long that when it finally lets go, your whole body doesn't know what to do with itself. That card is on my dresser. It has been since that afternoon. Emma is 9 now. She still sees Dr. Flores once a month instead of twice a week, which Dr. Flores says is exactly where she'd hoped to be at this point. She started playing soccer this fall, which I could not have predicted, and which makes me smile every time I think about it. She is loud again in all the best ways. She narrates everything. She sends me texts now that she has my old phone. Voice messages mostly, rambling and wonderful, telling me about something that happened at lunch or a video she saw about bats. Bats, she told me last week, can eat 1,000 mosquitoes in an hour. I did not know that. She has nightmares occasionally. Dr. Flores says they may never go away completely, but they'll get less frequent. And they have. She doesn't like small enclosed spaces. She won't use the bathroom at school if it's the single occupancy kind with no window. And we accommodate that without comment, because there's no reason she should have to push through it on anyone else's timeline. My son has full custody. He has a good woman in his life now who is patient and warm and who Emma has decided she likes, which Emma communicated by eventually telling her about dolphins and their sleeping habits. That's how you know you're in. The dolphin facts mean she trusts you I think about the version of that Sunday afternoon where I didn't say anything, where I told myself I was overreacting, where I waited for more evidence, or waited to talk to my son first, or waited until after the holidays because it would cause such disruption, or waited for any of the 100 reasons a person can find to not do something hard. I spent enough time with that version of events. If I had waited, Emma would have kept going into that room. That's the only math that matters. What I want anyone reading this to understand, anyone who's had a moment like the one I had in that den, where something a child said made the air go out of the room, is that you don't need to be certain. You don't need proof. You need enough of a feeling, enough of a concern, enough of a reason to make a phone call. That's all. You make the call, and you let the people trained for this do their work. Children don't have the language for what's being done to them. They talk around it. They draw dark windows. They ask you whether a room has to be a real room. They find sideways paths to what they can't say directly, and if nobody's listening, those paths dead end. Listen, I spent 32 years in front of young people who needed adults to pay attention. The most important thing I ever taught was not in a curriculum. It was this: when a kid is trying to tell you something, stop everything and listen. Not half listen. Not listen while planning your response. Really listen, with your whole self, and believe what you're hearing. Emma gave me a card that said the room doesn't scare her anymore. I am 61 years old, and I have never been more proud of anything in my life. If you're in a position right now where you've seen something, heard something, felt something, that instinct that something is wrong with a child in your life, don't wait for it to get worse. Don't wait until you have something you can prove. Call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. Call your local Child Protective Services. Call someone. The call is confidential. You are not ruining anyone's life by making it. You are not overreacting anyone's life by making it. You are not overreacting. You are doing the thing that none of the adults in Emma's life did for 8 months. And those 8 months are the only thing I will ever regret about this story. She calls me Grandpa, same as always. Every other Sunday now I drive to my son's place and pick her up, and we go to the diner. Chocolate milkshake for her, strawberry for me. She still talks faster than I can keep up. I would not have it any other way. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a dramatic way, just the quiet, persistent kind of thinking that comes at night when the house is still. The way one moment connects to the next. The way a single afternoon in a den in November became the hinge point of everything. Emma asked me whether a room had to be real. That question, small, sideways, the way children reach for things they don't have words for, was the cause. Everything that followed was the effect. The hotline call, the forensic interview, the courtroom, the chocolate milkshake on a Sunday, the card on my dresser that says the room doesn't scare me anymore. None of it happens if I don't stop and really hear what she's asking. That's the part that stays with me. Not the trial, not the sentencing, not even the moment I found out what Rob had been doing. What stays with me is the almost. How close I came to filing it away. How easy it would have been to tell myself I was a 61-year-old retired teacher reading too much into a kid's offhand question. I'd done that before. September, when she flinched at a door, I'd done exactly that. I told myself I was projecting. I moved on. And she kept going into that room. There's something I've come to understand about courage that I wish I'd known earlier in my life. It isn't the dramatic kind, the running into burning buildings kind, that actually changes most things. It's the small, uncomfortable, socially inconvenient kind, the kind where you sit across from your granddaughter in the diner and ask a gentle question and then actually listen to the answer even when the answer scares you. The kind where you pick up the phone and make a call that might upend everything, because upending everything is better than the alternative. Rob Decker made deliberate choices. He chose to lock a child in a room and tell her she deserved it. He chose to teach her that her pain was a secret, that telling would make things worse, that the adults in her life would turn on her if she spoke. Those choices had consequences, legal ones, permanent ones, the kind that follow a person the rest of their life. That's not sentiment. That's just how it works. What you do to other people doesn't stay contained to them, and Clara, whatever she knew or didn't know, made a different kind of choice. The choice to not ask too many questions, to not push on the door that had a padlock on the outside. That choice had consequences too, quieter ones, but consequences. My choice, the one I almost didn't make, had its own consequences. Emma plays soccer now. She sends me voice messages about bats. She sits in diner booths and talks faster than I can follow, and I think she is going to be okay. Not untouched, not unmarked, but genuinely okay in the way that counts. What I want to say to anyone who's sitting where I was sitting, not knowing for certain, not wanting to be wrong, afraid of what happens if you blow up a family over a feeling, is this: the feeling is data. The flinch is data. The dark window, colored over and over, is data. Children tell the truth in the language available to them, and sometimes that language is sideways and quiet and easy to miss if you're not paying attention. Pay attention. Be the person who asks the second question. Be steady and be present, and when a child reaches towards you with something they can't quite say, reach back. That's the whole thing. That's everything I know.